All right. All right. Let's go ahead and kick this off here. Cool. So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't attended any of my webinars before, my name is Michael. I'll be your host for today. I am a cloud solutions architect from Massdriver. Massdriver is a visual internal developer platform that enables engineers and developers to configure and deploy production-ready cloud infrastructure and applications easily in a matter of minutes. So during this webinar, we're going to be talking about migrating from Heroku to Azure. During the webinar, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I have some coworkers in the chat. I'll be able to respond to the chat as well. So don't hesitate to post your questions in the chat. And I'd be happy to dive into anything you'd like to discuss. So today, we are going to be migrating a Heroku application into Azure. I'm going to be posting a GitHub repo link in the comments right now. If you'd like to follow along, if you'd like a guide to help you with your journey migrating from Heroku to Azure, if you'd like an example app, step-by-step process, all of that is in this repo that I've curated for you guys, so feel free to check it out. It walks you through the process of migrating your application, your database, and even your cache into Azure. All right, so this is the journey that we're going to be taking today. We're going to migrate our application to Azure from Heroku. And to make this migration even easier for us, we're going to be using the Massdriver platform and taking advantage of some Azure bundles. Now, we'll talk about why we want to migrate from Heroku to Azure, why we might want to. Not everybody might want to, but there are certain situations where migrating from Heroku to the cloud in general may be the best fit option for you. So we're going to migrate our Heroku database, and then we're going to migrate our application. We're going to set up CI/CD with GitHub Actions, and all the while we're going to be looking at how Massdriver helps make this process a piece of cake for you. Okay, so let's go over why we might want to migrate from Heroku to Azure. I'd like to get your input as to why someone may want to migrate. So please post in the chat if you have any reasons why migrating from Heroku to the cloud in general would be a good idea. I'm going to cover some of them here, but I'd love to hear your input as to why people might want to migrate. So the first reason I came up with is actually a reason that I encountered while preparing this webinar in the first place, which is being forced into specific versions for infrastructure, such as like Redis or Postgres. That can be pretty complicated, especially with handling migrations or compatibility with SDKs. Network security, so your Heroku infrastructure being essentially open to the public, your application talking to your database over the public internet is not typically something that companies like to know. One thing that I didn't add in here are that your secrets aren't actually hidden. So if anyone has access to your Heroku account, they can view every secret that you set for your application, essentially exposed environment variables. There's cost savings when migrating from Heroku to the cloud. Heroku in particular, they are running on AWS, cover all of their AWS bills plus make a profit. So you're essentially paying AWS pricing plus Heroku's profit margin. Regional options, all of Heroku's infrastructure deploys into US East 1. If you want to set up any type of global distribution, it might be time to migrate into the cloud. Expanding your capabilities, you're limited to Heroku's offerings, which may benefit most, but there may be some offerings you'd like to take advantage of that aren't available within the add-on store. And then taking advantage of serverless capabilities, serverless offerings that a lot of the clouds offer, such as queues, data pipelines, things like that. all available within Azure, AWS, GCP. So these may be some of the reasons you might want to migrate from Heroku into the cloud in the Azure. And again, if you have any reasons that are not on this list, please post in the chat. I'd love to mention them and maybe talk about them for a minute or two. So we're going to go ahead and move forward. The first thing that I would like to do is set up a 3-tier infrastructure. I'd like to get this infrastructure up and running now, and I'm going to do it live on this webinar because it does take like 20 minutes to come up and running. I can do a lot of stuff while I'm waiting for the infrastructure to come up and running. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Massdriver to deploy this infrastructure, because Massdriver makes it really easy for me to configure and manage my infrastructure and my applications. Okay, so let's take a look at my application in my terminal first. We're going to take a look at the actual application here. So this is terminal. If I listen here, this is my example application. This is the same example application that is living in the GitHub repo that I posted a comment to. I can post another, I'll post another one here real quick. I'll just show this for a moment in case anybody wants to check it out. But this is an example application that I built up for this webinar. And what I'm going to do now is generate a Massdriver application template. What this essentially means is I'm generating the application bundle that's going to handle the configuration and the provisioning of my application into the infrastructure that is going to be managed by Massdriver. So before we get started, let's see, set my environment variables. Okay, that looks good. All right, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and hide this comment so everybody can see. We're going to run mass bundle new. So what this is going to do is this is going to generate a new application bundle template for me. We're going to call this Heroku to Azure. And then we'll say my Heroku app running in Azure thanks to Massdriver. Application template. So this is where we're going to essentially select where our application is going to be running. We have lots of options here. I could select Azure App Service for my app. Kubernetes deployment, that's the one I'm probably going to select. We have an OpenTofu module if you wanted to build sort of like a generic OpenTofu infrastructure module. We have the same thing for Terraform as well. I'm just going to go ahead and select Kubernetes deployment. And then this is where I'm going to select my application's dependencies. Now, knowing my application, I am dependent on Postgres and Redis. So I'm going to go ahead and filter for Postgres. And then I need to select Redis as well. So Postgres and Redis authentication. And then I'm going to click enter. Now it's asking me to name my dependencies. I'll show you guys why in a minute this is important. I'm going to go ahead and name my Redis cache and my database. Oh, that was my, darn, that was my my Redis or my Postgres. We'll call this cache 2. I'll go ahead and rename that connection here in a few minutes. We'll come back to that. And output directory Massdriver. Okay, so now if I ls in here, I have a new directory called Massdriver, and if I cd into it, and ls in here, we have some files, massdriver.yaml, and if I ls in source, we have our underlying Terraform files that it's essentially going to handle the provisioning of this containerized Helm chart for me. So I have this configured. What I want to do now is publish it into Massdriver. I don't want to make any modifications to it yet. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, I just want to get my infrastructure deploying, and then I'll come back to modifying and republishing my application a little bit later. So I'm going to run mass bundle publish. And now it is published to Massdriver. So now if I switch over to Massdriver, we're going to create a new environment. This is a project that I created for us for our webinar. Blank project. I'm going to create a new blank environment. We'll call this staging. for my migration. We'll select a credential and click submit. So now we have a blank canvas to draw our infrastructure on, basically. So I'm going to search for Heroku. Let's refresh here. Let's search for Heroku, and there it is. We'll drag this out, and we'll call this Heroku to Azure. My Heroku app running in Azure. Okay. So it's going to generate some suggested infrastructure for me. So if I zoom out a little bit, I can configure this. I can change this as I see fit. If I maybe wanted to use different pieces of infrastructure that I have the bundles for, I could do that. I'm just going to use what I have here because that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to configure my virtual network. We'll select East US, and the rest of this looks good. Automatic CIDR configuration for me. I don't have to worry about CIDR math. Alarms, that's going to be automated for me, and I'm going to click deploy. So now that's off into the provisioner. Now, while that's running, that's going to take a minute. I'll go ahead and work on configuring my cluster, my database, and my cache. So AKS, I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to select a config option. Instead of going through and modifying these settings, maybe I don't know what some of these settings do. Maybe my operations team configured this bundle for me and set some preset configurations. So I can click on config options and click development. And now it's going to pre-fill a lot of these fields for me. So that I don't even have to think about, how many cores or how many gigs of memory might I need. If I know specifically what I need, I can go ahead and click on the drop down and select exactly what I know I need. But if I'm not sure, I can select that preset configuration. I do want to enable the ingress controller, and I do want to assign DNS zone. So I'm going to click save for now. I can't deploy it yet because my virtual network is not yet up and running, but I'll save. And then same thing here. I'm just going to go ahead and select a preset configuration. We'll select a Redis or a Postgres version. We'll select the smallest SKU. Username, I'm just going to set this to Heroku for now. Automatic CIDR selection, that's good. Alarms, sweet. We'll save that. And then Redis, same thing, just preset configuration, makes it easy. I don't want non-SSL port. I don't want Redis clustering and alarms. All right, awesome. So let's check on the progress of our virtual network. This should be up and running just about now. Honestly, the longest process with deploying a virtual network bundle, at least the bundle that I've configured here, is not deploying the virtual network or the resource group. It's configuring and deploying the alarms, which is fair enough. Okay. Come on, little guy. Okay, so let's come back to this in just a moment, because this is taking a minute. While that's deploying, I'd like to go ahead and go into my Heroku dashboard in order to look at the application that I have running in Heroku. So I'm just going to switch over to Heroku. So this is the application that I made for this webinar. It's a really simple app. If I click on resources, I just have a web dyno. I have a Heroku Redis, Heroku Postgres, essentially the cheapest it can be. And then I have it configured to my GitHub repo so that when I make changes, I can manually deploy. I don't have CI configured or CD configured with it yet, but that is essentially what I have. And if I click Open App, it opens this activity generator thing. I can say no thanks to this particular one. It'll find another activity. Sounds fun. Adds an activity. Maybe I want to add 2 more. That looks good. So I'll exit out of this. Now, that's essentially the application in itself. It generates activities, it pulls from an API, and then it writes it into Postgres database. Redis isn't really needed. All I have Redis for is to essentially handle the connection portion, like establishing a connection, and then it just writes hello world into a key value store in there. Okay, so the virtual network's done. Let's go ahead and deploy Kubernetes real quick. We'll get this deployed. So all of this will take 15 minutes since they'll all deploy in parity. And we'll just let that run in the background. Okay, so the application, if we open up the application again, we still have these 3 activities here. So what essentially happened is we generated these 3 activities, we stored it in the database. Now we have something in the database to migrate. So I'm going to close this out, and we're going to switch back over to our terminal. Okay, so what I want to do now, in order to run my application in AKS, Azure Kubernetes service, I want to Dockerize my application. That's best practice. That's not how I have my application configured right now. If we ls, oops, wrong directory, in ls, I have no Docker files here at all. So we're going to go through the process of Dockerizing my application real quick. So I can do that with Docker init. So I'm going to use Docker init. This is a node. That's good version. NPM is good. Node app, yep, that's it. It listens on 8080 and created. So now if we go into the Docker file, it looks pretty nice. I'm going to clean it up a good bit based on what I know works for my my app. So we're going to use 16 Alpine. I don't need a production node. Let's see. I'm just going to delete this. Delete. Oops. Okay. So I need to copy package.json. Copilot knows exactly what I need to do. Then I'm going to run npm install, and then copy, and then we're going to switch our rect directory to user source app client. We're going to run npm install again. Run npm build, yep. And then we'll switch back, user node. So we don't have root privileges. And I am going to essentially change this to node, oops, app.js. Okay, let me just confirm that this is right from node 16 Alpine. Yep. Copy everything over. Working directory. Yep. Sweet. Okay. So now what I want to do is basically knowing my application. If I go into my JavaScript file that handles connecting to Postgres and to Redis, I know, where's Redis? I know just from experience of building out this application in preparation for this webinar, that the client that I'm creating to connect to Redis isn't sufficient for the Azure Cache Redis bundle that I'm using, which is highly secure. Essentially, I can't access it unless I'm within the virtual network. I need the access key. It is not, it is, how should I say this? It's more secure than Heroku Redis. I'll say that. I don't want to get in trouble there. So what I want to do is I want to set password, and we're going to set this environment variable to password. And we're also going to set socket, and then TLS true, and then is it reject? Yeah, reject unauthorized. False. Yeah, okay. Yep, that's what I want to do. So make that update. And then I want to build and push my Docker image into Azure Container Registry. Now I could use, Docker build and Docker push. I could use to push up the Docker hub. I could use the AZ ACR push command if I wanted to, but then I'd have to handle creating an Azure Container Registry, and it's just a mess. I'm just going to use mass image push. So we have a command with our Massdriver CLI tool called mass image push. And what this does is you can specify the namespace, the image name, the region, the tag, and it's going to essentially handle creating an Azure Container Registry for you. And then it's going to link to that in the future. So if you keep running the same image push with the namespace and the image name, it's going to push to that same image registry for you. It makes it really easy to handle this. So I'm going to run mass image push, and then we're going to call this webinar Heroku to Azure region East US -A for artifact ID. I need to get my artifact ID from Massdriver because it uses the artifact ID to authenticate to Azure. So we're going to get that from our credentials, and then this is the credentials I need. And I'm going to copy the artifact ID, paste it in, and then hit enter. So now it's going to build out this image for me. And in fact, it's given me a container of registry that I can use already running. I'm going to switch into Massdriver, go back into my environment here. My infrastructure is still deploying. I'm going to click on my application to configure it. And then I'm going to add this repository in here and save it. That way, when I'm ready to deploy, it's already there. I might as well configure the rest of my application while I'm here. Give it a little bit of resources, set the container port, and then enable public access. So we're going to set this to activity.mdazuresbx.com and then save. Okay, so that's ready to go when my infrastructure is done. Now let's switch back to the terminal. Why isn't it? There we go. Wait, did I cancel it? I hope I didn't cancel it. I must have not just been scrolled down all the way. No, I didn't cancel it. Okay, it's running right now. Oh yeah, I have to set the platform. That's right. Because I'm running on a Mac. So we'll just wait till this finishes here. Just make sure you guys are on this journey with me to make sure that this is building properly. Yeah, I think this is right. Yeah, because defaults to Linux AMD 64, and that's what Kubernetes is going to run. So we're going to let this push, and we're going to move on while this is running. Oh, it just finished. Okay, sweet. Let me just go ahead and I'm just going to confirm real quick that this is actually pushed up properly in Azure. I'm just going to check this on the side because I don't really want a surprise later. So this is going to be East US, and then services, repositories, webinar, latest. Okay. Yeah, that looks good. Sweet. All right. Okay, so what I want to do now, my application is pushed up. The application Docker image is pushed up, but it's not running yet. I need to migrate my database. I have data in my database now that I'd really like to save, those 3 activities. I don't want to lose them. So what I'm going to do now is connect to Heroku's Postgres. confirm that I have data in there, and then we'll move forward to the next step. So I'm already logged into Heroku in my terminal. What I want to do, here, I'll just clear this. I'm going to do Heroku, PG, pSQL. Yeah, this is what I want to do. So I'm essentially accessing the pSQL terminal for my application, and then we can do DT to find out all my tables. So I have activities, goals, and hobbies. I'm just going to select my activities. Okay, so here are my 3 activities that I don't want to lose. Awesome. So what I want to do now is capture my backup, or capture the backup for my Postgres database, because I don't want to lose it. So I'm going to use Heroku PG backups capture. Yeah, exactly this. So Heroku PG backups capture app, and then the app name, enter. And this is going to capture that very large database that I have that you can see up here into a backup file for me. Perfect. I don't want to download it yet. I'll show you why in a little bit, why we don't want to download it. We're actually going to download it in a little bit of a different way that uses Kubernetes as a jump box. It's going to be pretty cool. I also want to check up on my Redis cache, because I have Redis as well. I have some data in there. So I can do Heroku, Redis, CLI, webinar, full stack app. So this will connect to my Redis cache. Yep, perfect. And I can do keys, look at my key, I can get a message, hello world. Awesome. So unfortunately, we won't be able to migrate our Redis cache from Heroku to Azure during this webinar. Reason being is that Heroku Redis is on version 7.2, and Azure Cache for Redis is still maxing out at version 6.0. This causes an RDB file compatibility conflict that I don't currently have a workaround for. However, if you're currently Redis version 6.0 or lower, the migration guide for cache migration in my repo is going to work for you. So check that out. All right, moving on. It's now time. I think it's time. Let's check on our infrastructure real quick. Okay, so everything except for cache is up and running. Perfect. I mainly just need my Kubernetes cluster and my my Postgres database. So I want to migrate my Postgres data from Heroku into Azure now. So I mentioned earlier, I kind of alluded to it, we're going to use our Kubernetes cluster as a jump box. How do I do that? With Massdriver, it's actually pretty easy. So I'm going to click on my Kubernetes cluster. Let's refresh here because an artifact was created. So we're going to click on my Kubernetes cluster. Oh, we got unscheduled pod. Sweet. We can find out what the cause of that was too. So I'm going to download the kube config and Kubernetes cluster config. Okay, so we downloaded the kube config. Now we can use a tool called kubectl to essentially access that Kubernetes cluster. So let's go back into the terminal. We'll exit out of this. Clear. Okay, so we're going to export kube config equals downloads. Is it Kubernetes? Yeah. Okay, get pod. We'll use kubectl. Get pods. No resources found. Let's find out what the issue was that we saw. Get pods. Is it MD core? It's all running. Kubectl get pods -a. This one had one restart Azure npm. This might be what it was referring to. And I think that error just hasn't cleared yet. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so I don't have any pods up and running in my cluster except for the underlying services that come with the Azure Kubernetes bundle. As you kind of saw there, I can run that command again so you can take a look. at all of the services that come with the Azure Kubernetes bundle out of the box. We have Cert Manager, External DNS, Ingress, Alert Manager, Prometheus, and then you can also add on Grafana if you wanted to. So that's essentially that comes with everything that comes with Azure Kubernetes bundle out of the box. But we want to deploy the Postgres pod. We want to deploy essentially a Postgres image in order to access tools like pSQL. Now, I actually made an image in preparation for this. If I batch kube haiku. So I made this image that installs a lot of the tools that you need in order to do a migration. And it's actually available in another GitHub repo that I'll put in the chat. I wasn't preparing on sharing this today, but it was actually ready this morning. So haiku havakiro. So this Docker image, it's a pretty simple Docker image. It essentially just installs Heroku CLI, pSQL, Redis CLI, curl, Azure CLI, AWS CLI, gCloud CLI. Installs all of that for you out of the box. So when you deploy this, we'll go ahead and deploy this now. Yeah. You have all of those tools available for you out of the box. And that'll allow us to do stuff like log into Heroku to download our captured backup. It can access the pSQL command line to do a PG restore. If you wanted to do a cache restore or a AZ Redis import, that kind of thing, all of those tools are available, and this pod makes it really easy to migrate over. So this is just going to take a minute to come up. I hope it doesn't crash because, like I mentioned, I just finished preparing it like this morning / late last night. I hope it works. It was definitely working last night. But yeah, we'll find out. If I'm essentially like a blank Postgres Docker image that I can use, and we can work with that. But when this is done deploying, installing all the tools that it needs, we're going to exec into it. And then we are going to log into Heroku, and then we're going to download our backup, and then we're going to use PG restore. Now, the reason why this works here in Kubernetes as this jump box is because our Postgres bundle is configured in such a way that it is isolated from anything outside of the virtual network, right? Our database is secure. That's the way it's supposed to be, especially if you're running production sensitive data. You want your database to be secure, isolated from external connections. Only things within the configured network can access it. And our Kubernetes cluster happens to be one of those things. So, all right, so now that's up and running. Now, if we exec into it, so we're going to do, I need to type out kubectl, exec, it, haiku, hero, and then I'm going to access a shell. And there we go. So now if we do Heroku -- version, perfect. Okay, so now we have all of the tools that we need. We have pSQL as well. We have Redis CLI if we wanted that, Azure CLI, et cetera, et cetera. But I basically only need these two tools for this step. What I want to do now is Heroku login. Now I'm doing a Heroku login -I. Why is that? If you run Heroku login, it's going to open up a browser for you, and it is going to allow you to authenticate that way. Unfortunately, if you were to do that here and you use the link to open up the browser, you can't open up the browser in Kubernetes. So you open up the browser in your local computer. There's going to be an IP mismatch. Your IP address for your computer is not going to match the IP address in Kubernetes, and therefore it's not going to allow you to authenticate. So we do -I. This allows me to type in my email, And then I need to enter in my API key. So where do I get my API key? I go to my Heroku page, go into account settings, reveal, and then paste it in here. So now I'm logged in, and then I can do Heroku PG backups download -a webinar full stack app. Okay, so this is going to download my database. Obviously, it's a huge database. It took a while. If we ls, we have latest.dump. Perfect. So now what we need to do is we need to run pg restore. So we can run pg restore, verbose, no owner. You can modify these arguments however you need to. These are just the ones that I'm using. Now, host name. Well, how do I get the host name? I deployed my Postgres server in Massdriver, but I need to get it somehow. I know what to do. So we're going to go into Massdriver. And then we have, similar to how we downloaded the kubeconfig for our Kubernetes cluster, we can do the same thing. We can download the JSON, which essentially downloads the credentials for our Postgres database. So we're going to download that, and we're going to open it. Open. There we go. Oops. Open it 4 times. Okay. So we have the credentials here. I'm just going to move this over so I can copy it in directly. So host name. This is our host name. Let me make sure I copy it right. Host name of this. And then we need the username. So this is -u, username -p. I'm just typing the part 55432, and then -a? Oh no, I don't do the it's -d for database name. We're gonna call it Postgres, and then latest.dump. Now it's gonna unsupported version. In the file header. That's interesting. Okay, let's dig into this. Why are we seeing this? Making sure I actually did this correct. Oh, I don't need a port. -d Postgres latest.dump. Nope, that still doesn't work. Unsupported version, pg restore version. Okay, and file header. Oh, I wonder. Okay, so let's look up how to upgrade pg restore. Looks like I need to upgrade this in my Docker image. We'll take a minute on this, and if this doesn't work, then I'll just go ahead and go my other route. Upgrade pg restore and Docker image. Can I just do apt apt pg restore? No. Okay. Let's try this. Oops, I lost a. Exec. Okay, pg. Let's do psql pg restore. Postgres latest.dump. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're gonna delete the pod that I made. It's not quite ready. So we're gonna deploy Postgres instead, which I know works. So I'm gonna wait for this pod to delete. Come on, buddy. There we go. Okay. So we do kubectl get pods, no pods in my namespace. So let's go ahead and look at the Docker image I'm using instead. So this is a blank Postgres run. This one I know works for sure with PG Restore. It just uses the generic Postgres image. So we're going to do kubectl apply -f .kube, can't type today. This one will come up real quick. And then from here, we'll have to install curl and then install the Heroku CLI. There we go. So it's up and running. Kubectl exec-it postgres h, and then update install curl. Okay, so now we're going to install Heroku CLI. So we can do that with this command here. And then Heroku version, cool. Heroku login again with -i. My email, I'm going to go into Heroku, get the API key. Okay, logged in. So now we still have the latest .dump. No, we don't. That's right. Heroku PG backups download a webinar full stack app. Okay, downloading super large database, and then now PG restore, right? Yeah, okay, PG restore. PG restore, both no owner, database, Postgres, host. I'll grab that from the artifact from Massdriver. Dash, what do I need next? -u for username. This is just Heroku, and then latest.dump. Password, perfect. So I'm gonna copy the password, paste. Okay, so this, I know there's a couple errors here, but this actually looks good. This is what I want. So now I can do psql h. Let's copy, where am I? Copy the host. I just want to confirm that all the data is migrated over. So username, Heroku, and that should be all I need, right? Oh, database. Did I not copy the? It might have been the wrong password I put in there. Password. Sweet. Okay. So now if I look at my tables, I have my 3 tables there. Select from my activities. Sweet. Okay. So I have my data actually migrated over. So this part's done now. Whew. Okay. Thanks for bearing with me on my failed experiment for a custom Docker image. At least we got the database migrated over. It looks good. I got my data. Nothing's lost. So awesome. What I want to do next is actually go through the process of configuring my application template. Now, if you remember, we have this Massdriver directory. I'm just going to clear this. So we have this Massdriver directory. If we seed into it, we have the Massdriver.yaml. We have a source directory with Terraform files. I actually want to customize my application now. So if we go into the Massdriver.yaml, we can do some really cool things. We can set some environment variables. We can set secrets. We can create custom params. So I don't know if you remember looking at Massdriver, like for the image, repository, the tag, the namespace. In fact, if I switch over to Massdriver right now, we can kind of take a look. So we have the namespace, the repository, image.tag. We have all these configurations, and all of that is handled through this massdriver.yaml file, which is what makes Massdriver so powerful. Now, before I forget, I wanted to essentially fix these names that I set incorrectly. So this one is going to be database, and this one's going to be cache 2. Okay, so that looks good. These, just for context, these are essentially what establish dependencies, this connections block. So my application is dependent on Kubernetes cluster. It's dependent on one of these modes of authentication. In this case, it's populated with Azure authentication, and it's dependent on a database and a cache, because the cache and the database and the cluster are all required. And so these dependencies are essentially set in a platform, which allows me to do some really cool things in my application template. First and foremost, setting environment variables. So I'm actually going to set some environment variables here in this massdriver.yaml. I'm going to set my database URL. Now, I could do something like, this is using JQ, by the way, so excuse the syntax, but I could do something really weird like that, right? Like I could essentially set a string and it's statically set, and it's kind of a pain to deal with, but I could do that. I don't want to do that. I instead want to do something that's kind of pretty cool. So kind of bear with me here. I'm going to set a database URL that is going to pull from my actual deployed Postgres database in Massdriver. So if you recall, when I went into Massdriver, I downloaded the JSON file. That's how I got the username, the host name, the password, the port, all of those crucial credential pieces of information. I got those from the artifact of the infrastructure. And I can use that artifact to essentially reference dynamically where the values can be found instead of statically setting what the values are. Let me show you how that works. So we're going to do @text, because I do have a prefix here of Postgres. And then we're going to add plus. Now I need the username. So we're going to do .connections.database. So essentially we're going through the connections block that we were looking at before, and then we're referencing the actual connection by a name that I want to look for, then .data, .authentication, .username. Now, where do I get this data authentication username? This is really fetched from the Artisan file. I encourage you to go into our GitHub, Massdriver-cloud, search for artifact definitions. You can kind of view the JSON schema structure that we have set up for artifacts. I've published other videos. I've done webinars on that specifically. I'm not going to go into it too heavily on this video, but please check those out. Those are great references, great materials for learning what artifact definitions really are under the hood, how they work, and how they benefit you here. So we're referencing the username, then we're going to add a colon, and then we're going to add the password. So Copilot is catching on here. Database.data.authentication.password. Then we're going to add, basically what Copilot is suggesting here. So we have an @ symbol pulling the host name, another colon. Now we're pulling the port. The port comes through as an integer. JQ accepts strings. So we're converting this integer into a string here. Then we're adding a slash. And then instead of the connection for the database name, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to do .params.database_name. And then we're going to do plus, and then exactly this. So SSL mode equals required, because this is going to be essentially what my connection string is going to look like in its entirety to feed into my application as an environment variable. And I need this to configure properly. So I'm going to append this SSL mode equals required because that's what I need to be able to authenticate into the database. Now, I made this params.database name instead of using connections. And what I'm going to do is actually going to populate that database name configuration with data. And we can do that with adding a new param. So we're going to call this, we're going to make this required database name. And then we're going to make a new param, database name, sure. In fact, we're going to call this Postgres as the default, name of the database to connect to, perfect. So what I'm essentially doing is I'm creating a new configuration that's going to show up in the Massdriver GUI to configure my application. I can essentially enter the post or the database name. I can enter any string I want. I'm setting the default to Postgres. I can even set some other validators here. I can add regex. I can add a enum of values that I won't allow. I can add an enum of values that I'll only allow. You know, anything's possible with JSON schema and YAML. So this is exactly what I want. I don't want to modify anymore. Now I have my database URL configured. I also need to be able to authenticate to Redis. So we're going to do Redis URL, and then this is going to be pretty similar. Is Copilot going to do the right thing? So Redis plus connections, cache, data, authentication, hostname, colon, and then the port. Yep, that's exactly what I need for the URL. And then I need a Redis password. And that is exactly what I need. So the Redis password, I'm setting it as an environment variable, connections, cache, data, authentication, password. Okay, so this is exactly what I need. I don't need to make any more changes to this massdriver.yaml. I'm going to save it and exit. Now let's go ahead and list our source directory. Okay, sweet. This looks good. Now let's go ahead and run mass bundle publish. So this is going to publish all of the changes that we made into Massdriver. If I switch over into Massdriver now, click refresh. Now I'm in the configuration page for my application. If I scroll down to the bottom, we have a new param called Postgres, or sorry, called database name that's auto-populated with the value Postgres. I can change this to whatever value I want. Oops, I just changed the Bluetooth on my keyboard. But I'm going to leave it at Postgres, and I'm going to say initial deploy. So my Docker image up here that I've pushed up into Azure Container Registry. I have my infrastructure deployed up and running, resources allocated, my container port set, my DNS configured, exposing my application to the internet, my database set, and then also I'm setting a deploy message. I hope this works, exclamation, and deploy. Database was not present. So this needs to rejoin here. This needs to rejoin here. Here. What is this? What's going on here? Let's go ahead and look at the massdriver.yaml real quick. So database. Yep, this looks good. Cache, that looks good. Authentication, database cache. Let me refresh one more time. I'm sure it's something to do with changing. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So something to do with changing the database name or the connection names. Kind of got screwed there. That looks good. Okay, so that's right. Again, initial deploy. Really hope this works. And deploy. Okay, so now that's deploying. We can actually watch it from Kubernetes. So kubectl get pods -watch. And we should see our pod come up here in just a moment. Make sure it didn't fail. Okay. Yeah, it should come up here any minute now. Don't fail me now. Yeah, okay. So that's good. So we should see it pop up here. Come on, buddy. Oh my goodness. What happened? All right, let's figure this out. Connections. Interesting. Given value not suitable for var.cache declared. Okay, so let's go ahead and remove source. Yeah, I'm gonna remove this. I think I have an I have an outdated version of the CLI, which is causing a poor publish on that port. Let's redeploy. Okay, so this will hopefully work. Cradle, get pods, watch. Figuring out as we go along. That's the journey. And I'm sorry we're going to run a little late on this webinar. It was scheduled for an hour, but it is taking a little bit longer than anticipated. So if you have to bounce, I apologize I couldn't go through this quicker, but this will be uploaded onto YouTube after I'm done recording it, and you guys can view it at any time. Okay, so it looks like my application is starting to deploy, and that's really good news. So just confirming, and this should be up and running any minute. And there we go, it's up and running. So now I can do kubectl describe pod, and I can describe my pod to find out, okay, this container successfully started. Here's some, metadata if I want to take a look at that. The Docker image that it's using, that's correctly mapped. I can do kubectl logs, and I can hit the logs. And this is exactly what I'm looking for. So the app is running, connected to Redis, ping pong, got the tables verified, cache response, client list, perfect. This is exactly what I want. So in fact, if I browse to activity.md.azure.spx.com, we might be waiting on DNS propagation here. Oh, and there it is. So my application is up and running in Massdriver on Azure, and it pulled the 3 activities that we created earlier while we were running on Heroku. So we migrated the database, and now we're actually using those 3 Cs, which is really awesome. So now I can generate 3 more activities. Why not? Let's see what happens. So let's generate 3 more activities. And then we'll go ahead and switch back to Massdriver here. So we have 3 more activities good to go. Now, if we do kubectl get pods, we still have our Postgres pod there. I want to go into that Postgres pod again. So kubectl exec, yep. Go into that pod. Now we're going to do pSQL host name. Let me get the host name. Essentially, I'm accessing this Postgres server again to make sure that I am writing to the Postgres database properly, making sure all of that is good to go. Postgres, and then the password. Okay, and then, yep, we got our tables. Okay, so awesome. We have our 6 activities here. Everything looks really good for our migration. Now what I want to do is I want to confirm that my Redis is working properly. I mentioned earlier we weren't able to do the migration because of the version of the RDB conflict. However, my application is designed to write to Redis, so I want to make sure that the connection is properly configured and I'm still writing to Redis. So if I look at the, I'm not going to deploy the custom Docker image that I made. I'm still kind of like fine tuning it. It should be ready this week though. I'm just going to deploy this basic Redis pod that gives me access to the Redis CLI. So I'm going to do kubectl exec Redis shell. Oh, I need to apply it first. Duh. Redis. Yeah. Okay, so if we take a look, make sure it goes up and running. Okay, it's up and running. So now if I do kubectl exec, and now we're in. So we need Redis CLI, make sure I have it. Yeah, okay. So Redis CLI, TLS, insecure host. Let's hit the port first, 6380 host. So we're going to get the credentials for this Redis instance the same way we did for Postgres, and that's going to be from Massdriver. So if we go to Massdriver, we have our Redis cache. We're going to go into details, download the JSON, which will give me the credentials. And I pulled that up on my other screen. So I'm just going to paste these values in. So the host name is going to be this guy. And the password is going to be this guy. Okay, so now if I do keys, sweet, got the message, get message, hello world. Okay, so we're showing the same key value pair. This is great. We essentially migrated our application. We migrated our database. We set up our cache. Everything is talking to each other. It's beautiful. The last thing that I want to do is actually set up some GitHub actions for my application, so I can do some CI/CD. I'm going to take advantage of Massdriver to handle the continuous deployment. I'm not going to go through the continuous integrations here, the CI pipeline, because that's really unique to your runtime, your dependencies, all of that stuff. But at least with continuous deployment, I can set it up here on the webinar, because if you're using Massdriver, it's going to look pretty much the same and it's going to work pretty much the same. So let's get out of this Redis terminal. Clear. So I want to set up some GitHub actions. We're going to go back into this directory. And then what I want to do now is go to our doc site. So this is the Massdriver doc site. If you guys want the link, I'll paste that into the chat. And we're going to go into CI/CD, GitHub action. Scroll down a little bit. So here's an example GitHub action. Real quick, what this does is it installs our Massdriver CLI. It'll then run mass image push, just like we did earlier, with building and pushing your Docker image into your Cloud Container Registry, so ACR, ECR, GCR, etc. It'll publish your bundle. So, remember, if you make any changes to your massdriver.yaml or the underlying Terraform or OpenTofu, you need to publish those changes into Massdriver before they take effect. So it handles that step for us. It is then going to update the image tag for us in Massdriver. So it's going to update. Where is it? It's going to update this field for us right here for us. It's going to handle that. And then it's going to redeploy our application. So we pull that new image and then we run it. So let me go ahead and copy this. And then we're going to go into a terminal. We're going to make a directory called .github workflows nv.github workflows deploy.yaml. Okay, so we have this GitHub action. Now, I've already set these secrets ahead of time, the Massdriver org ID, API key, artifact ID. I've configured those secrets in my repo ahead of time to save time. So I'm not going to go through those, but essentially fetch those from your Massdriver organization. Namespace, we know this is webinar. So I'm just going to set this to static values for now. This is called, what was it? Heroku to Azure region East US, not East US. Image tag, I'm going to keep this to the git commit SHA. You can modify this however you see fit. If you're using it, you can use semantic versioning, whatever you want to do. I'm going to keep it to the git commit SHA and publish the directory. The build directory is the same, Massdriver. The build context for mass image push is the same because my Docker file is in the root directory. Now, image version, let's do something here. Find, oh, really? Can't do that? Fun vim. Okay, so the project, environment, and manifest, we can get that from Massdriver. So if I switch over to Massdriver, my application, I'm gonna click on details. This is kind of how this is structured. So my project is WebHees, my environment is staging, and then my manifest or my app name is Heroku Azure. So we're gonna call this WebHees environment staging Heroku Azure. And let's copy these. So I'm going to copy these values and I'm going to paste them over here, because for setting or updating a configuration value and deploying the application, you have to reference the exact application. So I just copy the values over to make it easy. And then setting the image tag path. So this one's kind of tricky. I'm going to go through it after I set it. It's going to be .image.tag. And I'm going to show you here in a second where I get this. In fact, I'll just open up a new menu or a new tab. Massdriver.yaml. Where is it? Oh, nb massdriver.yaml. Okay, so the image.tag, where do I get that? I actually get that from the params. Jump down. So this is actually coming from the configuration schema for your application. So in this case, we have image as a top-level object, and within image, we have repository value and tag value. So we're using JQ to set this expression here to set.image.tag and then the value. So you can kind of do this with any configuration, any param that you want. You don't have to do it to the image tag, but this is just the one that we set. Now, the reason we set it as a sort of like a filler instead of something static like .image.tag, our application templates for cloud specific like AWS, GCP, Azure, they may have a different pathing for that particular value. You may modify that pathing. This is essentially how that works. Okay. What did I do here? Oops, did I close that? Oh, I saved it. Darn it. Web workflows, deploy. Oh, no. I accidentally closed it. Darn. Shoot. Okay, let me go back and let me just make that modification real quick. Okay, so so this is WebHees staging, and this is Heroku Azure. Okay, this is that image.tag, and then up here, East US, Heroku to Azure. What am I doing? What am I doing? This is webinar. Okay, let me just double check that this is right. Yeah, that looks good. This looks good. WebHees staging Heroku Azure. Okay, cool. So this is our GitHub action. I don't need to look at it anymore. So we made those changes. Let me make sure I have everything that I need. Yep, that looks good. So if we go into our Git status, we have some changes for application. I'm just going to go ahead and push up all these changes. So git add dot, git commit, webinar, GitHub action, plus migrated to Azure. And then we will push. So now let's go ahead and view this in GitHub. So we have our new workflows, we have the Docker file, etc. If we go into actions, we can watch this action take place. Hopefully nothing fails. If it does, we'll figure it out. We'll fix it. No big deal. So it's building out this Docker image now using mass image push, and then it's going to push it up to Azure Container Registry using that git commit SHA. We're about to see that wall of red that NPM loves to give us. And by the way, this is the last step before we close out the webinar. For anyone who's hanging on, thanks so much for staying with us, staying with the webinar, even though we ran a little bit late. We will be wrapping up after this step is finished. Okay, should almost be done with the image build. Come on, buddy. While this is running, I do want to do a shameless plug. So we have a platform engineering podcast, if you guys aren't aware. I'm going to post a link to that in the chat. Really good podcast hosted by our CEO, Corey. In the latest episode, we actually had Brian Grant, the original lead architect of Kubernetes. And they talk about how it all started, how Kubernetes all started, how it's shaping the cloud native infrastructure. He also shares some great insights on handling complexity and what's next for Kubernetes. So be sure to check that out. And we have an error here. Get package name by convention. Okay, so I don't think I have a misspelling here. Very cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix that real quick. That's what I get for messing up and trying to rush through, making sure everything is deployed right. So this is WebHees. Git commit, fixing gub action. Oops. Okay. Yeah, so this is going to run a new action. We'll just let this run in the background. So yeah, that platform engineering podcast, super good. We had, or Corey had Mitchell Hashimoto on a couple weeks ago talking about Terraform. Really good stuff. So highly encourage you to check it out. We also have a community Slack available. If anybody went on our community Slack, I'll post a link to that in the chat as well. We have users from Massdriver, customers, enthusiasts, members of Massdriver, including Corey, all in the community Slack. Feel free to check it out, join us, chat with us. There are users who share their architectures, who share their bundles, custom bundles, things like that. It's a growing community. So please check it out and say what's up to us. Okay, so common wall of red for NPM. This is the last thing that we're going to do. Then we're going to check our website again, make sure it's still up and running after this. But yeah, this is pretty much going to be the last step, and then we're going to wrap up. Okay, are you done yet? Oh my goodness, 13 steps. This thing's a behemoth. Let's see, what do we have going on next week? I think we have some more webinars going on next week. Oh, here we go. It's actually deploying. So now if I switch to Massdriver, bam, we have our application. It's actually redeploying. It's what it's supposed to do. In fact, if we open up the configuration, the git commit SHA is now the image tag. So this is kind of what I was referring to earlier with updating the actual tag live within Massdriver so that your application can use that tag and redeploy. So now the last step, the deploy step, is going through, and it should be done in just a moment. So I'm just going to wait for this to finish. And then we're just going to browse to our application, make sure everything's really good. And then we'll conclude successfully having deployed from Heroku into Azure. And, I wanted to mention, if anybody wants help deploying from Heroku to the cloud, whether it's Azure, AWS, GCP, and you're not really sure how to go about it, maybe the process is a little scary, intimidating. This webinar essentially encapsulates the migration process for a very simple application, but we actually just finished the migration for a customer of ours into AWS of a much more complex code base. So this is something that we are able to do. We are able to easily migrate our users from Heroku into the cloud, and we're happy to do it. So if you're interested in actually going through that process and you need some help, maybe you're not sure how to go about it, please hit us up. We'd be happy to talk about it. We'd be happy to even set up some, sort of like white glove service to help out with that migration for you. Please hit us up to ask and find out more about that, because we can help. Let's see, is this guy still deploying? Let's see what GitHub says. Yep, still deploying. Still updating that image. This should finish up in just a second. And then, so we have another webinar running next week. It's actually being hosted by our CEO, Corey. Let me go ahead and bring this. How do I bring this over? So our CEO, Corey, is running a new webinar next week, Accelerate Your Infrastructure as Cloud Adoption. So how to import your infrastructure into ready-made OpenTofu or Terraform templates. It's an hour-long session. He's honestly extremely experienced with IAC, being a part of the birth of OpenTofu. So that's going to be a really great webinar. Make sure to check that out next week. So it looks like our application finished deploying. Now we're going to go to activity, and there's our application. And we can add more activities if we want to. Looks like that API got do 3 jigsaw puzzles. Okay, so that's essentially everything that we needed to do. Now let me go ahead and switch over to this. Okay, so I promise, guys, we're wrapping up here. Thank you so much for sticking with us. If you're still with us 20 minutes over time, we just discussed the migration, why you might want to migrate from Heroku into Azure or into the cloud in general. And then we went through the process of effortlessly deploying a 3-tier web architecture into Azure using Massdriver. We migrated our database, we migrated our application, and instead of running on Heroku, we're now running on Azure Kubernetes. We're in a network isolated architecture. Everything is secure. Everything is ready for scaling. It is production grade. Everything looks great. And then we set up our deployment pipeline using a GitHub action. So we can continue to customize that deployment pipeline, add some CI steps if we wanted to. Everything is looking excellent for our migration. So that concludes our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you even more for sticking around over an hour if you have. I'll be sticking around for a few minutes to answer some questions in the chat. Feel free to drop any if you have. And if you're interested in learning more about Massdriver, please check out massdriver.cloud. Thanks, guys. Catch you on the next one.